Roberta or Gina. I don't recall seeing anything from Mary, so I'm assuming she's planning on attending today.
I haven't heard otherwise.
Okay, thank you. We'll wait a few minutes then.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have everyone now. Jennifer, are we waiting for any staff people?
Staff will join as the items come up. So I think we have everyone.
Great, then I'll go ahead and call the meeting of the Board of Public Utilities for the City of Santa Rosa to order. Secretary Atha, if we could have a roll call, please.
Yes, Chair Galvin,
Here.
Vice Chair Arnone,
Sorry, I'm here.
Board Member Badenford,
Here.
Board Member Grable,
Here.
Board Member Mullen,
Here.
Board Member Watts,
Here.
Board Member Wright.
Here. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First item on the agenda, item 2, statements of abstention by board members. Do we have any? Hearing none, we'll move to item 3, which is a study session on the Kelly Farm Mitigation Bank opportunities. Director Burke.
Yes, thank you, Chair Galvin and members of the board. And presenting this item today will be Deputy Director, Environmental Services, Sean McNeil.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. All right. So today good afternoon, Chair Galvin, members of the board. Today I'm here to talk with you about the Kelly Farm Mitigation Bank opportunities. Next slide, please. And before I get into that, I just want to start with just setting a place. The importance of place here is that we are in the Santa Rosa Plain, which is described as a relatively flat area marked with creeks and wetlands all throughout. It extends from the north, just south of Healdsburg, all the way down to Cotati in the south, and on the western side, Sebastopol, to the east throughout the flatter regions of Santa Rosa. And it's home to many endangered species. Next slide, please. These endangered species, I'd like to just kind of talk a little bit about some of the ones that we deal with most commonly, and that'll be some threatened and endangered plants that occur primarily in wetlands, and then the California tiger salamander. Next slide, please. These threatened plants, they live within these habitats called vernal pools, and vernal pools are described as depressions in a relatively flat area that have some sort of inability for water to percolate through. So that could be that the ground has been has a hard pan, or it could just be that the type of soil is very clay. We have very clay soils in the Santa Rosa Plain, and so that creates these, when you have a depression, these pools. And these plants have grown in these pools and evolved in these pools and now are endangered, as many of these vernal pools have been lost in the Santa Rosa Plain. Many of these plant species can be avoided by projects, so we don't typically have to purchase a lot of credits for these plants because the habitats that they're in are so rare. But contrast that with the next slide, please. With California tiger salamander, they're upland. They live in two different habitats. The upland habitat, next forward one, in most of these habitats that we have in the Santa Rosa Plain, it's these grasslands, and the adults and the juveniles live in them. And they'll live in some kind of ground-dwelling mammal burrows. Next slide, please. Throughout most of their life. And in Sonoma County, our tiger salamanders use primarily pocket gopher burrows, and we find them in grassland areas. And because they use the grassland areas, it's all the undeveloped land in the Santa Rosa Plain is tiger salamander habitat. This is very different than the endangered plants because we can't avoid our projects from impacting the undeveloped land oftentimes. So we have to have mitigation for upland habitat for tiger salamanders. Next slide. Also, these tiger salamanders, while they live mostly underground in these burrows through most of their life, they do mass migrate in the winter time, right? As the rains begin at nighttime, they start making their ways down to vernal pools where they meet up, and the females will lay eggs in these pools as they're filling up with the rain, and the males will fertilize those eggs, and then they'll head back to their upland burrows, and then the eggs will develop in these pools. And so these pools can be seasonal ponds, roadside ditches, or slow-moving creeks. And these habitats, because they've become more rare through time, these are the same habitats that the plants use, that the population of tiger salamanders has dramatically dropped through time. So if you have a mitigation bank, you have to have both upland habitat and the wetland habitat to preserve this species. Next slide, please. So just kind of an example of a few projects that we have coming up in our CIP planning is a flood wall around the Laguna treatment plant may need upwards of 40 acres of tiger salamander credits. The actual amount will depend on the exact location, the final location of the flood wall, and the mitigation ratios that will get assigned by the regulators. It's a bit of a negotiation process for that to happen. So we could say it's 2-to-1 ratio. They might come back and say 3-to-1 ratio. So the most conservative would be 40 acres of credits for that. We also have a number of sewer lining projects throughout the Santa Rosa Plain, and you wouldn't think that a sewer lining project would have an impact to tiger salamanders, but it turns out a part of that process is we have to disturb a lot of soil around the manholes where we're doing the work so that we can get in there and line the sewers. And so these projects typically have 1/10 of an acre of impact, but could add an additional year onto the project delivery schedule to go out and purchase these credits. So some of these smaller projects, while it's not a big dollar figure, it's sort of a procedural hurdle that makes these purchasing of the tiger salamander credits challenging. And then we may have other projects at the city farms or the treatment plant here. And this is all prime California tiger salamander habitat. So any projects we do in these areas would need to have credits. Next slide, please. So instead of just building a bank, there are other ways that we might be able to get these credits and get regulatory approval to build our projects. One is the Sonoma County is developing the scope for a habitat conservation plan. What a habitat conservation plan is a planning document associated with land land development decisions where they will preserve some habitats and develop basically their own mitigation banks for others to buy into and pay. It's a sort of government option for meeting your mitigation requirements. So this was originally driven by developers to kind of pull together and see, instead of them having to do project by project permitting, if they could work with the county to get a region-wide permitting scope to develop a habitat conservation plan. So we wanted to make sure that we weren't going to be in conflict with this effort. So I reached out to the county to see if they thought us developing a private mitigation bank for the city of Santa Rosa would affect that. And they said it wouldn't. And indeed, they thought it would be a good idea for us to move forward on our own process, but they also invited us to be involved in their process. So once they begin the public process and scoping of this habitat conservation plan, whether it be countywide or something just for the Santa Rosa Plain, they'll invite the city to participate in that. And they're not anticipating, even on the fastest track, the completion of a habitat conservation plan that we could use until 2025, but most likely it'll be much later. Next slide, please. Of course, we could continue doing what we've always been doing, which is to just purchase our credits through private mitigation banks. One of the drawbacks to this is that there are not that many credits available at any one time. So if we needed 40 acres of credit for our flood wall, we may or may not have those credits on the market available for that project to begin. And we'd have to be looking at some other way of meeting that compliance. So it could add additional time to that. But also we would begin competing with the limited amount of credits for the private developers. So private developers trying to get their projects built are going after this same limited tiger salamander credits. And also when we go to purchase these credits, it's a complex transaction that has both environmental review as well as sort of real estate implications, because it's basically a real estate transaction, and it could extend the project delivery time. And we have seen projects have to wait an additional year to be built because we've been waiting on getting the tiger salamander credits purchased. So those are some of the downsides to the private mitigation. Next slide, please. So we started looking at what other alternatives might be available for the water department. And we took a look at some of our farm properties, and I'll just highlight what we know about Kelly Farm. It's currently leased for hay crops, about $85 an acre per year, spread through 2 different farmers on this property. The lease for the proposed mitigation area will expire in fall of 2021. We do use this farm and supply it with recycled water use, but we are unable to spread biosolids on it anymore due to it being California tiger salamander habitat. And it is the only farm of all the farms that we have that have documented California tiger salamanders found on it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that a little later. And so if you could click next slide, please. And here outlined in red is the 100-acre section that we've identified as being ideal for setting up a conservation bank. So what we're talking about is just a portion of Kelly Farm, not the whole component. Next slide, please. So the other benefits of Kelly Farm, there already is some natural ponding that occurs on the farm. So it does have the clay soils that could easily be converted into these vernal pools that we would need for the breeding habitat. Next slide. Some of these pools are a little more developed, and probably should we develop a bank, most likely they would need to be sort of deepened a little bit so that they hold water for longer periods of time, and some areas might need to be compacted with clay because of the many years of agricultural tilling might have destroyed some of that hard pan that is important for retaining the water. Next slide. And we do have some interesting plants existing already on Kelly Farm. So we do have the common meadowfoam over here on the left of the screen, growing in a wetland area. And we also have found some hayfield tarweed out there. It's interesting that these plants are still existing in this well-tilled agricultural production field, but that just shows the strength of the potential habitat that exists at Kelly Farm. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's just kind of a graph comparing the different options and if we look at costs. So back in 2014, the city had a project where we purchased a couple acres of tiger salamander credits, and that came in at about $89,000, or it came in exactly at $89,500 per acre of credit. In 2020, we had another project that required credits about the same magnitude, about 2 acres again, came in at $168,000 a credit. We have seen prices on the market at $200,000 a credit. We were told we were getting a special deal, a government rate, which seems funny, but they're selling us stuff. But $168,000 is almost double over 6 years. And we've had some small projects that where the impacts are less than an acre. We've paid up to $210,000 per acre of credit. And then when you compare that against us just building our own bank, our estimates of building a bank came at $78,750 a credit. And what I'd like to do is skip ahead 2 slides and break down that. So could we go one more? Thank you. So we worked with a consultant to kind of come together with an estimate of building a 40-acre bank. So here's what they came up with. The studies, fees, permitting, and design would be about $450,000. Construction, we're estimating at about $1 million. That would be the improvement of the wetlands, the removal of the irrigation in that area, and building of a fence to keep people out of that area. And then some interim monitoring and management. Whenever you set up a bank, you need to prove that it's working. So we'd have a consultant do that work for us. And then a big ticket item is we'd have to set up an endowment. And what the endowment would do is the returns on that endowment would be what we'd be using for the long-term maintenance of the site. So as fences need to be repaired and things. So when we talk about the total cost of $3 million, $3,150,000, that would include all future costs as well. Then we compare that number, that $3 million, to the cost to currently buy the 40 acres of credit at the price that we recently got, which would be $6.7 million. And so the potential savings on one project alone with the 40 acre would be $3.5 million on tiger salamander credit. So if we could go back one slide. So just to kind of reflect, the mitigation bank options are to continue purchasing our credits per project. And as these costs are continuing to rise, and we'd have greater competition with development projects, this might not be a preferred option. The next thing the second item we could think about is building the 40-acre mitigation bank with the possibility of expanding it up to 100 acres. The reason why we kind of capped it at 100 acres is we'd have to look at a different area. And we thought 100 acres is probably as much or more than we would use in the department. And that could, if we built a 100-acre mitigation bank, it would be more cost effective. I gave you the cost for the 40-acre, but some of those costs are fixed, whether you're doing 40 or 100 acres, and the incremental cost of the construction wouldn't be that much more by setting up the 100-acre parcel versus 40. And so we think that would be a good opportunity. So if we could skip forward 2 slides. Perfect, thank you. So the potential next steps, should the board decide to develop a mitigation bank of 40 to 100 acres, would be for us to hire a consultant to help develop a restoration plan. And this would give us the precise elevations that we would need for each of the pools to guarantee that we get enough water for the California tiger salamander life cycle, and that we have the appropriate amount of grasslands as well to support the upland habitat. And then we would work with once we have that plan, work with the regulatory agencies to develop and approve a maintenance plan. So that would set the amount that we'd have to put into, to set aside for the maintenance of the long-term maintenance of the project. And then we would, by 2022, we could begin the construction of new wetlands, install the required fencing, and begin the removal of that irrigation, which wouldn't be allowed in a mitigation bank. And that probably would put us on target for about 2023 to complete that process and the initial monitoring requirements, and begin using that bank for credits. Next slide. So where are we now? We have projects that will need tiger salamander credits and may need some wetland credits, and we might be able to develop wetland credits at the same time as tiger salamander credits through this process. So we would be able to use those both here for these projects. And the city has evaluated all the different city farms. Back in 2003, we did extensive drift net surveys where we basically put up blocks at times when we knew tiger salamanders would be migrating, and we had collection buckets, so they would be dropped. They had to walk through the area, and they fell into these buckets. And in the morning, biologists would look in all the buckets, and they did this for 2 years, or 2 wet seasons in a row. And the only place we found tiger salamanders was on Kelly Farm, and we found 36. So we feel that's the best place for tiger salamanders, and it's the only place that has them. And part of having a mitigation bank, you need to prove that you have the animals on site. We did look at the conservation easement to make sure that we would be able to conduct this activity given the conservation easement that we have on our city farms. And indeed we could. The only limitation is that we would not be able to sell these credits commercially, which is fine with us. We don't want to compete with the private bankers. We just want to get a good deal for our ratepayers. The city has developed a draft prospectus for creating a mitigation bank on Kelly Farm, and we took that draft prospectus, which kind of just laid out a lot of the information that I shared with you today, to the mitigation banking interagency review team. It's a pretty long team name, but it consists of California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Fish and Wildlife Service from the feds, and the Army Corps of Engineers, and the Water Board, all kind of sit on this banking team, and they review it. We got favorable support for this proposal, and they would like to see us develop a full prospectus and move forward. They were encouraging. And so now we're at the point of bringing this to the Board of Public Utilities to let you know what we've learned about this opportunity, and to get your guidance on whether or not we would want to move forward with this. So if I could move to the next slide, please. So the staff recommendation would be to begin the process and design the mitigation bank up to the full 100 acres. It's an estimated cost on that item about $150,000. And then once that design is complete and we've been able to have some more discussions with the regulators, make sure that it's a pretty good, that it would work, and then develop some a better cost proposal based on that design, bring that back to the BPU for review and guidance on whether to develop a 40 or 100 acre or some portion of a 100-acre mitigation bank. So with that, next slide, please. Answer any questions?
Thank you, Deputy Director McNeil. I'll open it up now for any questions or comments from members of the board. Vice Chair Arnone.
Yeah, thank you. My only question is there a lifespan for these credits if we develop them? I mean, is there any expiration date on how long we could use them? I know we have problems with expiration of credits in other fields. So I just want to make sure we don't have that problem with this kind of a mitigation bank.
Yeah, so the credits don't expire, but in the unlikely case where the California tiger salamander gets taken off the endangered species list, we wouldn't need them. But
okay.
They're not going to come off the endangered species list.
Right.
That's pretty clear, unless projects like this were extremely successful.
Okay, that answered my question. Thank you.
Board Member Wright, did you have a question? You need to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Anyway, could the credits you said we can have both wetlands and the tiger salamander credits, could the same acre be a credit for either one? So could you, so in the unlikely event the tiger was taken off, then you could have wetland credits?
Yeah, so I didn't go into too much the way the credits work, but there's some stacking allowed, but basically when you need a tiger salamander credit, you need to determine if it's a breeding habitat credit that you need, which would be like the wetland, or if it's upland habitat. So mostly what we would do is all the upland habitat, we would be our tiger salamander credits. And then we'd have the wetlands could be what they call stacked. So we could have tiger salamander credits in there as well as wetland credits. And if we did get some of the endangered plants moving in, we could have endangered plant credits as well. Though I don't see a great need for us to actively go after propagating those plants. That creates it's a harder project and adds more expense, and we typically would avoid any occupied habitat with our project.
Now, regarding the endowment, I assume that $1.5 million spins off money and that just funds it forever.
Right.
Is that the way it works? And then would it be maintained by city staff, or would that be something we would bid and have contractors do? What are we thinking?
Well, I think it would be open. We'd have to see as we go through this process what the actual maintenance requirements are. I think there would be a mix of things that our staff would do and other things that we would hire consultants to do. We'd have to maintain fencing. My guess is we could do minor fencing repair, but when it came to a full fencing replacement, we would probably bring a contractor in for that. So originally, when we first set up the bank, we would most likely have an outside biologist dealing with all of the paperwork and monitoring associated with that. But then we could probably do the monitoring with our own biologists from then on out after that first approval process is complete.
Thank you.
Deputy Director McNeil, is 100 acres pretty much the extent of the Kelly Farm that we can use, or in the future would be able to expand that mitigation bank if needed?
We could expand the mitigation bank. There is a road that goes through there. They don't like roads inside your bank, so it would be a separate area typically. But in kind of accounting for our projects, we don't see a need that the water department has for more than 100 acres of tiger salamander credit at this time. But
Okay.
we could set up more if that need changes over time.
Thank you. Other board member questions or comments? Board member Mullen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions. First of all, I support the effort to set up our own mitigation bank, if you will, because anybody that's been in this county for the last few decades knows the offsite mitigation programs that have been used throughout the county. It's kind of the Wild West, and prices greatly fluctuate, as you've indicated, just with our projects, but it's been all over the county. And so I support the efforts to hone in on a program that's going to benefit the city and its ratepayers. A couple of my questions related to the endowment, just following up on Board Member Wright's question. We're going to set it up at $1.5 million at the outset, but we all know that over time costs change just because. And so if we find out that our 1.5 million over 10 years or so starts to dwindle, how would we replenish it? Would it just be an expense out of the ratepayers, out of operational expenses, or is there some other bucket of money that we would be using?
So yeah, it would have to fall on the bank proponent to maintain the infrastructure should the endowment crash for some reason. I will say that the endowment and the way that they set it up is very conservative on the returns that you typically would get and how much money we could spend. So the $1.5 million at this point is an estimate. It's not until we actually have the designed bank and agreed upon maintenance and management measures that we develop that. But it is a pretty conservative tool that's used, but ultimately the responsibility relies with the bank owner. So that would fall on the ratepayers.
Thank you. Regarding the scaling of it from 40 up to 100 acres, I would assume that the cost to set up the 40 versus the 100 is just a scaled operation. So it's just the increment up. If we settle in at, say, 50 acres, and then later we want to go up to 100, it's just a scaled increase? Or would we be going forward with an overall program that says up to 100 acres and then we scale it internally?
Yeah, so phasing it is, I think, how we might do it, because it's actually really expensive to have the California Department of Fish and Wildlife approve a bank. And it's like $100,000, so we'd want them to approve the whole thing. And then we could scale it in as we need it or as it fits our needs. But we'd have to describe the whole project as we phase it in. So the first phase would have to have all of the pools for the breeding that would be required. And then the second phases could just be additional upland habitat, making them less expensive.
Sure, thank you. So the conservation easement that basically limits it to, as you described it, it limits it to the city's use. We couldn't, for instance, if somebody came to the city and wanted to develop a large affordable housing project, and they run into the issue with the tiger salamanders mitigation, we couldn't provide any assistance to them as far as providing this bank to their use.
I think that would take a legal opinion to do that. Right now, the language that holds us up in our easement is that we're not supposed to have non-ag commercial development on the farms. And so if we're not selling it to these credits to a commercial entity, and we're using them for our own operations, that wouldn't be considered commercial. So I don't know, we would need to, in the case that you laid out, we would need to bring that. Typically what we've seen with Luther Burbank has done a lot of their own mitigation banks. They've set up their own instead of buying them on the market usually.
The reason I raise that is we all know that affordable housing projects or similar projects that are community benefit projects are really running on a real tight margin. And so if you provide a so-called government option, which is obviously going to be less than what the market could be at the time a project like that comes through the planning process, that we could provide, some relief if it's a project that we want in our community. So that's the one reason I asked that question. And I, for one, would support at least exploring the opportunity for, in the sole discretion of the city, we could offer it to certain projects. For that reason, I would support that exploration. Just a couple more questions, and thank you for your patience. Will this project, once built and in service, would it also include our sub-regional partners? Since the land that we're using is part of the sub-regional system, I'm supposing Kelly Farm is part of the sub-regional system. So would the sub-regional partners also be able to utilize this mitigation bank if they needed it?
So I don't know 100% if the city farms are owned by the sub-regional system or by the city of Santa Rosa. And I think there's a distinction there. I don't.
So that's a great question, Board Member Mullen. Technically all the properties are owned by the city, but these are all great questions. This is why we're having this study session, to get some board direction and the questions of what you're interested in, so that we can go back and do more research. So my understanding is that the funding from the sub-regional system has been part of some of these properties in terms of maintenance. We'd have to go back and do the research, though, to see exactly how this was acquired and with what funding, to see if it was by all the partners or just some portion of the sewer system. But technically the property is owned by the city of Santa Rosa.
Okay, thank you. My last question, and again, I appreciate the patience, is in our exploration of this site, have we also, or maybe the county is doing this, looked at some other sites for possible banks, if we're looking at regional sort of or large scale mitigation banks? And in particular, I call attention to sites like the open space lands that are basically dedicated to stay open without development. However, there may be an opportunity to partner with them with wetlands, because the land remains open and there's no development on it except some ponds. And the same could be true in the community separators. Same thing is the land stay open. It just provides an opportunity to have some joint use or some win-win type of uses. So those are all my questions. I appreciate you responding to them. Thank you.
So we haven't really looked at developing on another property for our purposes, but that is the goal of the county's project that we will be participating in, would be identifying, not based on who owns what, but based on what's best for the individual species of concern that the Habitat Conservation Plan would use. Our analysis really was, what assets does the city have that we could utilize to our best interest? And so that's kind of where we went with that, our analysis.
And thank you for that. And the main reason I raised that issue about open space or separators is land costs when you're setting up a bank like this is one of the major expenses. And so if we can utilize for sort of joint use with land that's already owned by the open space or a part of a community separator, that reduces the overall development site cost quite a bit, because the land is already covered. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other board member questions or comments? Okay, not seeing anyone. We'll now take public comments on the study session. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you're dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. Secretary Etha, do we have anyone?
There are no hands raised at this time.
Thank you. That will then conclude the study session. Thank you again, Deputy Director McNeil. Appreciate it. Item 4.1 are the minutes from October 15th. We'll take public comments now on the approval of those minutes. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you're dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. Do we have anyone?
There are no public comments.
Thank you. That will conclude the minutes. They'll be approved and entered. We have no staff briefings. We have one consent item, item 6.1.
I'll move the consent calendar.
Second.
Motion by Vice Chair Arnone, seconded by Board Member Mullen. At this point, we will take public comments on item 6.1. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you are dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. Secretary Etha, do we have anyone?
There are no hands raised.
Very good. May we have a roll call vote on the motion, please?
Yes, Chair Galvin,
Aye.
Vice Chair Arnone,
Aye.
Board Member Badenford,
Aye.
Board Member Grable, Board Member Mullen,
Aye.
Board Member Watts.
Point of order, are we allowed to have discussion on this item?
If you have comments, you can certainly make them. Did you want to pull it from the consent calendar, or you just had a comment?
We had a public comment that was sent in this morning in a letter, and it was emailed to Board Member Grable and myself and some staff. I'm not sure if everyone else received that comment, but I wanted to make sure that we discussed that item.
I think we all did receive it. If you have specific issues you want to discuss, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to, I think there's a few items that were brought up in this letter. I think there was actually 7 different specific concerns that this resident had. My question is specifically just the overall concept was that this is going to be a very long project, and there were several items that, the residents will be dealing with based on the 2-year length of this project. And if there's any, staff have, I think, been working with this resident for a while to try to mitigate any of these concerns. But one of a few things that I just wanted to bring up was around fire safety, if that has been, discussed at all. Being, we've discussed this with other projects, but with the size and location of this item, if that has been discussed. And I tried to review the bid documents and wasn't sure if I could find anything as well, if any staff have comments about that.
Okay. Director Burke, do you want to take that, or do you want Mr. Dwyer to join us?
Sure. And just, I'm assuming we can go ahead and call staff up to speak in response to this request. Is that correct, Mr. Maddow? I just want to make sure we're doing this right from a consent perspective, or do we need to?
The board has a wide field of discretion, latitude in terms of how it chooses to deal with the questions that are being raised by Board Member Watt.
Okay, great. Thank you. So yes.
So we have a pending motion, which we'll in effect table until we get through the comments, and then we can go back for a vote.
Okay, great. Thank you. So yes, Board Member Watts, great question. There has been a lot of work and a lot of public outreach, and fire safety has been discussed at length with the fire department and the public. And I would like to ask our Associate Civil Engineer, Greg Dwyer, who is the lead on this project, and to address this specifically, as well as any other questions you have. Greg, you are muted.
Okay, how about now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Galvin, members of the board. I'm Greg Dwyer with Transportation Public Works. I'm also the project manager for this project. We've spent considerable efforts coordinating the traffic control that's going to be implemented on this project with city traffic engineering and city fire. We've come up with a proactive approach to be ready in the case of any sort of emergency to facilitate any traffic control needs immediately. So the contractor may be directed to immediately pull his traffic control. We may send traffic control one way or the other, depending on how fire wants to implement emergency access. There's emergency access lanes available as well. We had an extensive public outreach meeting where City Fire took part in that as well. We sent out 15,000 mailers. We've had very few questions. The video is available on our project website as well for viewing. And this was discussed in great length. The important thing here is to understand that we're aware of the conditions, that it is an emergency evacuation route, and we have a proactive plan in place to address any emergencies that may come up.
Thank you very much. That's helpful information. My only other question on this letter was in regards to the noise and hours of operations. And I was just wondering if you could clarify if it is correct in the resident's letter that there is possible high noise levels from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and then again from, I think it was 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. the overnight. Yes, from 12 a.m. Can you clarify if that is correct as far as those noise concerns?
Yes, the work hours will be Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., with the exception of work being performed on Mendocino Avenue, which will be done at night between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. That includes there's a business where we are, a private business where we will be installing sewer and water lines through their lot, and that allows the business to stay open and it avoids potential massive impacts to traffic flow. We are sensitive to the needs of residents, and we understand, especially everybody's at home now with school and work and the noise, and we are aware of that. And we are, willing to work with all the residents, and an option is to give them a hotel voucher if need be, if it's too much of a burden on them. Oftentimes people choose to stay in their residences, but this is an option that's available. And we did weigh all of these. We're trying to keep the project going as smoothly as possible and to minimize the impacts to the residents. And we felt that this was the best plan in place. And this was worked in conjunction with city traffic engineering as well.
Thank you very much for your work on this and outreach and really weighing all the options. I appreciate it. I think that answers all my questions from this letter. If you want to resume the motion.
Thank you all. Let's just make sure if there's any other board member questions or comments. Not seeing anyone. Thank you. And just so I'm clear, Secretary Atha, did we have any public comments?
We do not have any hands raised.
Thank you. Would you go ahead and do a roll call vote on the motion, please?
Yes, Chair Galvin,
Aye.
Vice Chair Arnone,
Aye.
Board Member Badenfort,
Aye.
Board Member Grable, Board Member Mullen,
Aye.
Board Member Watts,
Aye.
Board Member Wright.
Aye.
Thank you very much. That'll take care of the consent calendar. We'll move now to the report item 7.1. Director Burke.
Thank you, Chair Galvin and members of the board. Item 7.1 is a refund of water demand fee to identified multifamily properties that paid an additional irrigation demand fee. And Deputy Director Administration Kimberly Zanino will be making the presentation.
Excuse me. Good Good afternoon, Chairman Galvin and members of the board. We are bringing a request for a recommendation to City Council to refund developers who purchased water capacity for irrigation, as well as paying an irrigation capacity that was incorporated in the per unit fee for some multifamily units. Next slide, please. Today I will go over the multifamily demand fee, the irrigation demand fee, the proposed refund, and the recommendation. Next slide, please. In August of 2014, City Council approved the water and wastewater demand fee study and adopted the demand fee schedule. The table shown here indicates the amount of demand or capacity to be purchased for connections to the public water system. The amount of demand is listed here by type of development and the peak volumes associated with each type of use, shown in 1,000 gallons. These factors are developed using City of Santa Rosa customer usage data. I won't go through all of them, but you can see that condominiums, apartments, and mobile homes, which have a peak demand volume here of 9,000 gallons of water, which is the basis for the dollar value of the fee. So the fee is calculated by multiplying the peak volume times the per 1,000 gallon rate. When adopted, the price per 1,000 gallons of water demand was $244. So based on this table, multifamily units would have paid 9 times the $244 per unit. And this is where we found the issue that we're bringing forward to you today. Next slide, please. Staff was working with a couple of developers that were proposing construction in Santa Rosa that was different than the typical multifamily unit. These were high density buildings that included some very small units. This type of construction is becoming more desirable to address City Council Tier 1 goals for increasing housing and affordable housing in Santa Rosa. So working with the developers, staff was trying to determine where they would be categorized based on the current demand fee structure and the fee schedule, and discovered that the amount of the demand, that 9,000 gallons, looked incorrect for certain multifamily developments. Demand fees are only listed in systems as dollar values without associated volume, so staff had not realized that the volume was likely too high. So while reviewing, they realized that the 9,000 gallons incorporates an irrigation factor per unit. And if a multifamily developer also installs a dedicated irrigation meter, they pay irrigation demand separately, as well as their per unit fee. I will point out that the 9,000 gallons is the correct amount for those properties that do not install a separate dedicated irrigation meter. We began researching and found that there was a category that was not included in the previous chart. There should have been also a category for multifamily units with a dedicated irrigation meter. When that incorporated irrigation demand is removed, the correct volume per unit for these specific developments is 4,800 gallons and not 9,000 gallons. So for those properties with a dedicated irrigation meter, they pay a separate demand fee based on the volume of water that they need for their landscaping and a per unit fee. So for example, if they needed 10,000 gallons of peak use for irrigation, they pay 10 times the $244. And their per unit fee should be 4.8 times the $244 for their total amount of water demand that they need to purchase in order to connect to the system. Staff has already corrected the fee in the system and immediately began the efforts to find a solution. While refunding is not required, to be transparent about the issue, staff went through the process of identifying every permit that was pulled to connect to the city water system that had paid that multifamily per unit rate and the additional irrigation demand fee. We determined what they did pay, what they should have paid, and the per unit, and calculated a refund for these properties. Next slide, please. In all, there were 14 developers that were affected, which pulled 42 permits in total. Many of these were single multifamily projects, but they just had multiple permits pulled for one project. All of these developments also set a separate and a dedicated irrigation meter and paid an irrigation demand fee separately, as well as that per unit fee. So specifically, we are proposing refunding the cost of the irrigation capacity that's incorporated in that per unit fee to each of these developments. The total amount of the additional irrigation demand, since the fees went into effect for all multifamily units with a dedicated irrigation meter, is $545,000, or $545,674. Next slide, please. So it is recommended by Santa Rosa Water that the Board of Public Utilities recommend by resolution that the City Council approve a refund in the total amount of $545,674.80 for water demand fees collected from multifamily units who paid an additional demand fee for separate irrigation demand, and authorize the Chief Financial Officer to pay these refunds to the individual properties from the associated fund.
Thank you, Deputy Director Zanino.
Any questions?
Board member questions or comments, please? Hearing none and seeing some shaking heads, we can go ahead. Do we have a resolution? If somebody would like to make a motion to approve the resolution.
I'll move that we approve the resolution to refund the $500,000 overcharged for demand. I don't have it in front of me, for overpayment of demand fees.
I'll second.
Motion by Board Member Wright, seconded by Board Member Watts. At this time, we'll take public comments on item 7.1. If you wish to make a comment, please, via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you're dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. Secretary Etha, do we have anyone?
There are no raised hands.
Thank you. Would you do a roll call on the vote, please?
Yes. Chair Galvin,
Aye.
Vice Chair Arnone,
Aye.
Board Member Badenfort,
Aye.
Board Member Grable, Board Member Mullen,
Aye.
Board Member Watts,
Aye.
Board Member Wright.
Oh, aye. I'm sorry, I had my mute wrong.
All right, motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Deputy Director Zanino, thank you for the presentation. We'll move on to item 8, which is public comments. So we're now taking public comments on item 8. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you're dialing in via telephone, please dial *9. Do we have anyone?
There are no public comments.
Thank you. We have no referrals. We have no written communications. Subcommittee reports. Yes, Board Member Watts.
So the budget subcommittee, we met again on October 29th, and we had staff and consultants provide additional information on the current rate setting process, including an overview of the methodology and the cost of service study. The cost of service study analyzes the various components of the proposed water and wastewater rate increases, including the specific effect to each tier of the water rate and effect to the commodity and fixed rates, as well as examples of the total bill costs and impacts per family household and those types of bills. So in addition, information was presented on the community outreach that will be accompanying the process in 2021. And we will have more meetings that we'll probably give you guys in a few more months.
Thank you. I'll report that the Contract Review Subcommittee met on October 20th and reviewed 2 professional service agreements, of which they were unanimously supported by the subcommittee. The first is an amendment to the contract with Carollo Engineers to provide engineering services during construction of the UV disinfection project. And the second contract was for construction management and inspection services with Somas for the UV disinfection project as well. Both contracts will be coming to the full board on November 19th. Do we have any other board member or subcommittee reports? Subcommittee reports? Any questions for either of the subcommittees that we're reporting? Very well. We'll now take public comments on item 11. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you are dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. Secretary Etha, do we have anyone?
There are no hands raised.
Thank you. Are there any board member reports? Hearing none, we'll move then to the director's report.
Thank you, Chair Galvin and members of the board. I have a couple things to report to the board today. Pardon me. First, a little bit of bad news. The board may recall that the board gave direction to staff in February in closed session regarding price and terms parameters for the potential purchase of 1,400 acres in South County for biosolid application. Since that time, the real estate manager and her team has diligently tried to negotiate a purchase and sales agreement with the 5 owners. Unfortunately, we were notified last week that the family has received other offers and has accepted one of the other offers. Staff does believe that the timing for the environmental process that we would have to go through was the main sticking point for our contract. So unfortunately, we were unable to be successful in trying to acquire that property. I wanted to let the board know some good news. The Sonoma Marin Saving Water Partnership, which represents 12 water utilities in Sonoma and Marin counties, including the city of Santa Rosa, continues to be recognized for our region-wide efforts in implementing water use efficiency programs. This year, the U.S. EPA recognized the partnership with 2 of the 29 awards given out nationally under their WaterSense Partnership Program. So really quite a big deal. The partnership received the Sustained Excellence Award for our Qualified Water Efficient Landscaper Program, or also known as QWEL. The QWEL program provides landscape professionals with certifications in water efficient and sustainable landscaping practices. And this year, the partnership increased the local certifications by creating Spanish language course offerings, in addition to partnering with Santa Rosa Junior College. And then the second award that we received as the partnership was the Excellence Award, which recognized the partnership's efforts in promoting WaterSense labeled products. The partnership continues to seek innovative ways to promote WaterSense labeled toilets, faucet aerators, shower heads, and other promotional offerings. And this marks the 12th and 13th award issued to the partnership by the EPA WaterSense program, and the 8th year in a row that we have received awards. So really quite an achievement for the partnership and all of the member agencies that participate. And then last, I wanted to let the board know that the 2020A bond series for the UV project funding and the 2012 bond series refunding was approved by City Council on October 27th. So big thank you to the board and the council for their support in this item. Both bond issuances will be a significant reduction of expected debt service for our ratepayers. We are expecting to price the bonds on November 10th, so next week. But we will be watching for the most favorable timing to receive the biggest advantage for our ratepayers. And that concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Director Burke. Any questions or comments from the board for the director? Hearing none, we are now taking public comments on item 13. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you're dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. Secretary Etha, do we have anyone?
We have no public comments.
Thank you very much. That was 13, which brings us to item number 14, which is adjournment. So I wish you all a good afternoon, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. We are adjourned.